What if I told you that 20 years ago, give or take, there was an academic who wrote a book that described with precision many of the social problems that we have today? What if I told you that very few people were thinking about these things 20 years ago, and basically no one had these same ideas with such accuracy and precision? Now, I'm not talking about me. 20 years ago, I was about as far from an academic as anyone could be, and today I've reverted back to my natural state. Now, I'm talking about an author who wrote a book. And in that book, interestingly, it's not just his insights that cut through time and accurately describe what we are facing today. He cites many other authors, some who had written 50 years prior to even that book 20 years ago. Now, what's the point I'm trying to make here? It's popular to think today that everyone kind of has an equally good idea of what's going on, that everyone can kind of see reality to the same extent and the same level of accuracy. That is absolutely wrong. And the more you cling to that false idea, the more life is going to hand your butt to you. You need to understand that there are people on earth today who are much wiser than you are. And you need to understand that some of these people are openly communicating their thoughts for the benefit of all people. If you don't believe these two ideas, you're not going to go looking for these folks, and you're not going to recognize them when they pop up in front of you. Now, God sprinkles these kinds of people throughout history and across the geography of the whole world. God's intent with these people is to protect you from consequences beyond your comprehension. That's not to say that they're religious people. Many of them aren't. Maybe it's safe to say that most of them aren't. And it's not to say that they would say that that's their intent. But God uses these people for your benefit. So the book is called Democracy, the God That Failed. And I won't recommend it to you, although, hey, go for it. It's a free country. You can check it out if you'd like. The reading is very difficult. It's not written in the best way, but the ideas that the author, who's named Hans Hoppe, wrote about are amazing. Now, I've got a few long quotes that I will read to you, and you can hang around until you get the point. Let's start with this one. The increasing admixture of egalitarian class politics to the pre-existing tribal policies leads to even more racial and social tension and hostility, and to an even greater proliferation of the low and underclass population. In addition to certain ethnic or tribal groups being driven out of the cities as a result of tribal policies, increasingly also members of the upper classes of all ethnic or tribal groups will leave the city for the suburbs, only to be followed by means of public, that is government, transportation, by those very people whose behaviors they tried to escape. While the upper class and the merchants leaving in larger numbers, with the upper class and the merchants leaving in larger numbers, however, one of the last remaining civilian forces will be weakened, and what is left behind in the cities will represent an increasingly negative selection of the population, of government bureaucrats who work but no longer live there, and of the lowlifes and the social outcasts of all tribes and races who live there, yet who increasingly do not work but survive on welfare. Now, I'm from Baltimore originally, and I can tell you that that's exactly what has happened in Baltimore, and it's not the only place where that has happened. That's happened in cities around the country. And it happened after this guy wrote this book. It's like he had a crystal ball and he described exactly what would happen. Let me read another quote. When one would think that matters could not possibly become worse, they do. After the race and the class card have been played and done their devastating work, the government turns to the sex and gender card, and racial justice and social justice are complemented by gender justice. The establishment of a government, a judicial monopoly, not only implies at the same time that formerly fully integrated jurisdictions, as within households and families, will be forcibly broken down or even dissolved, rather than regarding intra-family or household matters, including subjects such as abortion, for instance, as no one else's business to be judged and arbitrated within the family by the head of the household or family members. Once a judicial monopoly has been established, its agents, the government, also become and will naturally strive to expand their role as judge and arbitrator of last resort in all family matters. To gain popular support for its role, the government, besides playing one tribe, race, or social class against another, will likewise promote divisiveness within the family, between the sexes, husbands and wives, and the generations, parents and children. Once again, this will be particularly noticeable in the big cities. Again, this is exactly what has happened in the past few years, even more recently than the other change in the quote that I quoted before. So how could he have known all of this? Did he have a crystal ball? No. He's just a very wise person who looked at the history of what governments do over time in democracies and extrapolated into the future. And it's spot on. And if you see this clearly, then it gives you tools to prepare for the future. And if you had read this 20 years ago, which I did not, I just relatively recently learned about this book, then you would have had tons of ways to prepare for the future. As a very practical example, you could have avoided buying a house right on a bus stop or a metro stop. And if you had the misfortune of doing that, you know that those end up being enormous hotbeds of crime. Let's read another quote. Every form of government welfare, the compulsory wealth or income transfer from the haves to the have-nots, lowers the value of a person's membership in an extended family household system as a social system of mutual cooperation and help and assistance. Marriage loses value. For parents, the value and importance of a good upbringing of their own children is reduced. Correspondingly, for the children, less value will be attached and less respect paid to their parents. Owing to the high concentration of welfare recipients in the big cities, family disintegration is already well advanced. In appealing to gender and generation as a source of political support, that's generation as an age, and promoting and enacting sex, gender, and family legislation, invariably the authority of heads of families and households and the natural intergenerational hierarchy within families is weakened. And the value of a multi-generational family as the basic unit of human society diminished. Indeed, as should be clear, as soon as the government's law and legislation supersedes family law and legislation, including interfamily arrangements in conjunction with marriages, joint family offspring, inheritance, etc., the value and importance of the institution of a family can only be systematically eroded. For what is a family if it cannot even find and provide for its own internal law and order? At the same time, as should be clear as well, but has not been sufficiently noted, from the point of view of the government's rulers, their ability to interfere in internal family matters must be regarded as the ultimate prize and the pinnacle of their own power. To exploit tribal or racial resentments or class envy to one's personal advantage is one thing. It is quite another accomplishment to use the quarrels arising within families to break up the entire, generally harmonious system of autonomous families, to uproot individuals from their families, to isolate and atomize them, thereby increasing the state's power over them. Accordingly, as the government's family policy is implemented, divorced, single parenting, and illegitimacy, incidents of parent, spouse, and child neglect or abuse, and the variety and frequency of non-traditional lifestyles, homosexuality, lesbianism, communism, and occultism increase as well. It's exactly what you see. Here's another one. Parallel to this development will be a gradual but steady surge in crime and criminal behavior. Under monopolistic auspices, law will invariably be transformed into legislation. As a result of an unending process of income and wealth redistribution in the name of racial, social, and/or gender justice, the very idea of justice as universal and immutable principles of conduct and cooperation will be eroded and ultimately destroyed. Rather than being conceived of as something pre-existing and to be discovered, law is increasingly considered as government-made law, legislation. Accordingly, not only will legal uncertainty increase, but in reaction, the social rate of time preference will rise. That is, people in general will become more present-oriented and have an increasingly shorter planning horizon. Moral relativism will also be promoted, for if there is no such thing as an ultimate right, then there is also no such thing as an absolute wrong. Indeed, what is right today may be wrong tomorrow, and vice versa. Rising time preferences combined with moral relativism, then, provides the perfect breeding ground for criminals and crimes, a tendency especially evident in the big cities. It is here that the dissolution of families is most advanced, that the greatest concentration of welfare recipients exists, that the process of genetic pauperization has progressed furthest, and that tribal and racial tensions as the outcome of forced integration are the most virulent. Rather than centers of civilization, cities have become centers of social disintegration and cesspools of physical and moral decay, corruption, brutishness, and crime. So there you have it. That was about 20 years ago, maybe a little more, that this book was first published. So I hope that this is a good lesson on how clearly some people can see the future, and that we ought to pay a lot more attention to these kinds of people who are dispersed throughout the population. And they're very rare, but if you find one, what they have to say can be immensely valuable.